Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. I am Tootight Lautrec, the drag laureate of the Sanitarium and Master Mistress of Glitterature Alley. And here we are in Glitterature Alley at the bottom of the down staircase in the permanently sequestered remainder section of an unnamed local library, which may or may not have two large lions lazing on the front steps, waiting patiently to see what musty, fusty, dusty books I will dig out from the remainder section to discuss next. Now, if you've been to my channel before, you've known that I just finished a huge project in which I dusted off the 1609 quarto version of Shakespeare's 154 sonnets plus The Lover's Complaint, and discussed all of those, which you can find in the playlists on my channel. But now I've decided to train my glitter-encrusted eye on fiction in a new series I'm calling Pulitzer Who, where I discuss Pulitzer Prize winning fiction that seems to have fallen behind the shelves in the remainder section, or at least books that I have never heard of, and I'm hoping other people may not have heard of, and that I will bring back into the light of day. But Tootight Lautrec, drag laureate of the Sanitarium and Master Mistress of Glitterature Alley, you might ask, why the Pulitzers? Well, thank you for asking. Firstly, I chose the Pulitzer Prizes because it's an already compiled list, and it makes my job that much easier to just draw from an already compiled list. Secondly, I'm choosing books I've never read before, or I've never heard of, because I wanted to choose books that are new to me and that I would like to read as if I were a newcomer, because you always got to keep it fresh. And lastly, but not leastly, I think it's good to ground ourselves. And by ourselves, I mean, of course, me and my closest ally and arch nemesis, Joe O'Malley, who happens to have a book coming out in September of 2025. I wanted to ground ourselves so that we know that not everything that glitters is gold, so to speak. And in that vein, speaking of my nemesis, I looked up the word to find out if I was using it correctly. And so this is our first cocktail party vocabulary word of the season, which is nemesis, the Greek goddess who personified retribution for the sin of hubris, which was arrogance against the gods. So we're trying to fend off arrogance against the gods. We're trying to fend off hubris by toasting to the cocktail party vocabulary word nemesis with a Starlight Martini, which figures prominently in Joe O'Malley's book, coming up in September of 2025. And Brian at Bookish had asked me what the recipe was, and I had to fiddle around a little bit. I had to do quite an extensive amount of experimentation, and what I've discovered is the perfect Starlight Martini is 2 shots or 2 parts Black Sambuca with 5 parts vodka, with a little rim of a little rind of lemon on the top, which is the starlight of the drink. So Starlight Martini. Here's to nemesis. Here's to fending off hubris in every endeavor we embark upon. Starlight Martini. So part of this fending off of hubris is that, yes, while it's wonderful to have a prize, and it's wonderful to have a book come out, it's wonderful to have a second book come out. Okay, we know, we get it. But we also have to remember that books come and go. And while big name prizes and awards are nice, nothing lasts forever. Hence, my series Pulitzer Who. So, the Pulitzer Prizes. Joseph Pulitzer, who was born in April 10th, 1847, and lived till October 29th, 1911. He was a Hungarian-American politician, journalist, and newspaper publisher. And when he died, he funded a very flexible will that, number one, endowed Columbia University's School of Journalism, and number two, funded the Pulitzer Prizes, which originally there were 4 prizes for journalism, 4 for books and drama, 1 for education, and 5 traveling scholarships. But because Pulitzer wanted to raise the stature of American journalism and arts on the world stage, his will allowed for the expansion of prizes to keep up with the modern era. So today there are 23 awards that include awards for poetry, music, photography, memoir, and audio journalism. So for the fiction award, the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction is awarded to a book of fiction written by an American author, published preferably dealing with American life, published in America during the previous calendar year. And the very first Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 1918 goes to, drumroll please, His Family by Ernest Poole. I know. Who? Ernest Cook Poole, born January 23rd, 1880, died January 10th, 1950. He was a journalist, a novelist, and a playwright. He was born to a wealthy family, but he became a champion of the working class. And Wikipedia even describes him as a popular writer of proletarian-tinged fiction during the era of World War I and the 1920s. Never heard of him. Now, just because I may be a bit of an ignoramus and have never heard of him doesn't mean that you haven't, or that you haven't read his novel, His Family. And if you have, please tell us in the comment section what your experience was and what you thought, and if you agree or disagree with anything that I might say here today. So, the Pulitzer Board did not begin publishing the names of finalists for the Fiction Prize until 1980, so we don't know who else may have been in contention for this 1918 prize, but we do have a list of authors who published books in 1917 that may fit the American-centric bill, and those include Winston Churchill. Not that Winston Churchill. I was surprised to find that there is an American writer named Winston Churchill who has nothing to do with the British statesman. But so Winston Churchill wrote a book in 1917. 2 books by Sinclair Lewis may have fit the bill. 2 unfinished novels published posthumously by Henry James. A book by Upton Sinclair. Sherwood Anderson's second book, which came before his famous Winesburg, Ohio, because that didn't come out, I think, until 1920. And there's a writer named Abraham Cahan who wrote The Rise of David Levinsky, and Edith Wharton even wrote a book called Summer, so that may have also been in contention. But His Family by Ernest Poole won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 1918, and here is how it begins. He was thinking of the town he had known, not of old New York. He had heard of that from old men when he himself had still been young and had smiled at their garrulity. He was thinking of a young New York, the mighty, throbbing city to which he had come long ago as a lad from the New Hampshire mountains, a place of turbulent thoroughfares, of shouting drivers, hurrying crowds, the crack of whips and the clatter of wheels, an uproarious, thrilling town of enterprise, adventure, youth, a city of pulsing energies, the center of boundless land, a port of commerce with all the world, of stately ships with snowy sails, a fascinating pleasure town with throngs of eager travelers hurrying from the ferry boats and rolling off in hansom cabs to the huge hotels on Madison Square. A very nice start, if I may say so myself. So the protagonist of His Family is a man named Roger Gale, described as a rugged man, not quite 60 years old. He lives in New York City in what is called in the book the Lower West Side, but which we know of as the West Village, in an ever-changing Lower West Side, which causes Roger some consternation, as we shall see. His wife has died years before the book begins, and he has 3 adult daughters, 2 of whom live at home, the eldest of which, Edith, does not live at home. She's married with 4 children and 1 on the way. Deborah is single and lives at home with Roger. She has a boyfriend. She's almost 30 years old. She's a principal of a school for underprivileged tenement children, and she's a political activist, as much as women could be political activists in the late 1910s, because the 19th Amendment had not been ratified until 1920, so women still didn't even have the right to vote. The youngest is Laura, who is single and free at the beginning of the book, and she's a good time girl who, according to her father, has a little bit too good a time for his moral compass. And then there's a 4th young character named John Gear, or Johnny Gear. He's a crippled Irish boy, and by boy I mean 18 or 19 years old, and he's crippled because his drunken Irish mother dropped him when he was a child, and he's been crippled ever since. And here we get a bit of a glimpse into Roger Gale's qualms about the ways in which New York City is changing. There are an unpleasant influx of people like Irish and Italian and Jews, poor people, immigrants. Oh my, heavens to Betsy, whatever shall we do about this? So Roger's a bit off kilter as a result of these changes, but Johnny Gear, this poor crippled Irish boy, in the jigs and reels throughout the novel, he does earn Roger's sympathy to the point where Roger takes him into his business, which seems to be a bit unclear still to me. It involves something about newspaper clippings, but I could never quite figure out what it was that Roger Gale did. But Roger Gale takes Johnny into his business and under his wing and finally into his own home, essentially adopting him as the son that he never had. So on the surface, this book is about Roger Gale trying to understand the rapidly changing modern world, his place in it, and his family roles in the ways that the world is changing. And he sees family as everything. He's fixated on the idea of procreation as the only way to make a happy life, because that's how it was for him. But below the surface, and I mean just barely below the surface, we have this, which comes on the 3rd page of the book. Before that, Judith, his wife, had been here. It was then that the city had been young, for to Roger it had always seemed as though he were just beginning life. Into its joys and sorrows, too, he had groped his way as most of us do, and had never penetrated deep. But he had meant to, later on. When in his busy city days distractions had arisen, always he had promised himself that sooner or later he would return to this interest or passion, for the world still lay before him with its enthralling interests, its beauties and its pleasures, its tasks and all its puzzles, intricate and baffling, all someday to be explored. And this is where the book got me for good. I'm all in at this point. Roger Gale has a deep yearning to start. He wants to penetrate deep into the joys and sorrows of life, eventually. He wants to, one might say, pay attention. And this is what drives the novel. And so, of course, anyone who knows me knows that this will keep me going. So because he never started in life, he never paid sufficient attention to life's joys and sorrows, he feels a lack. And his wife's dying words to him were that he would live on in the lives of his children. And he doesn't quite know what that means. After her death, he loses faith, and he comes to the cold realization that he will not see her in the next life, because there is no next life. There is only this life. And this adds even more urgency to the life that he's currently living. and it gives him anxiety as he tries to understand his daughters' lives. So his daughters, again, Edith, the oldest, she's married with 4 children and 1 on the way, and she's fulfilling the ideal of family life in the good old-fashioned way. But she comes off as judgmental and conservative, kind of what we would call a trad wife, inflexible, closed-minded, and actually kind of a bitch. So there's Edith. Then we have Deborah, who is serious and ambitious and politically active, a suffragette. She's never married and she's never had children, and Roger is afraid that she might be too modern and too ambitious because she may never marry and she may never have children, and thus she may never be truly happy in the way that Roger thinks that happiness comes to someone. She considers the tenement children of her schools, past and present, all the children, as her family. And these conflicting ideas of family evolve with both Deborah and Roger as the novel progresses. And then we have Laura, who's in her early 20s. She also lives at home at the beginning of the novel. She's a flibberty-gibbet. She's a gad-about-town, good-time girl with, we learn as the novel progresses, questionable morals for 1917 in general and for Roger Gale in particular. And her romantic entanglements and betrayals do create a picture of a rather unlikable character. So his family is aptly named because it is about his family. It's a quiet novel about family life for which I admittedly am a sucker. There are no car chases, no explosions, no enormous intrigues, although there is death and World War II and poverty. But the dramas, large and small, of trying to make a life in New York City form the crux of the novel, and how the family deals with it is the center of everything that happens here. Its tone is calm, sure, and unhurried. There are some forays to the family farm in New Hampshire, and those are also beautifully described. Poole explores the emerging place of women in society, and I think he does it quite well, of 1917 American society, by contrasting Edith's stultifying traditional wifely duties ideals with the ambitious and competent Deborah, with the careless and selfish Laura. And Poole's own progressive ideas, while I feel they are not overtly, overbearingly drawn, they do form a contrast with the character Roger Gale at the beginning of the novel and the ways in which they evolve in Roger's experience through the rapidly changing world and the lives of his daughters. So the dramatic tension arises from Roger's yearning to make a start, to embody his life, to pay a better attention to his life. And this yearning and anxiety propels him to guide his daughters to make their own lives mean something so that they can avoid his fate of never having started. And his yearnings for a family in which everyone is happy is never really quite realized because life doesn't work that way. But these yearnings themselves provide the sufficient tension in the novel for my tastes anyway. So what kept me reading and what made me want to stop? Well, his family is more character-driven than plot-driven. Instead of what will happen next, I simply wanted to be in the same room with these characters as they made the decisions about the things that happened in their lives. I wanted to know, how will Roger survive when World War II comes and destroys many livelihoods in the cities, including his? Will Deborah ever marry and have children? And if not, why not? And if so, why? How will Edith react to Laura's romances and infidelities? Will Johnny Gear thrive under Roger Gale's wing, or will he fail? Small events like these may not be enough for some people, but they are enough for me, and I remained completely emotionally invested all throughout the novel. Now, qualms. Did I have any? I did not have many qualms about this novel. There is a YouTube channel called Supposedly Fun that does an absolutely marvelous job of talking about his family, and he actually talks about a lot of other Pulitzer Prize winning novels and or just the Pulitzer Prize in general. And so I'm going to link that below so that you can look at his review of his family. But he has qualms about Roger Gale's discomfort with immigrants and his old-fashioned ideas about procreation as the only way to be happy. And I suppose that as a reader I had qualms about those, but I accepted them as foibles in Roger Gale's character because I don't agree with them, but I can see how they are ways to complicate his character and ways in which he can evolve as a character. Also, Supposedly Fun takes issue with Poole's overuse of symbolism like the constantly ticking clock, which I knew about because I had seen his review, but I didn't find it in any way obnoxious, and I didn't find it overwhelming. It does form a cover picture of the reissue of the novel, so it is an element, but I didn't find it obtrusive in any way, shape, or form. Also, Supposedly Fun seems to have a little bit of a difficulty with Poole's obvious assertion of his political agenda. And while, yes, we are able to see the author's sympathy with the plight of the working poor, I was able to disappear into the novel, and I rarely, if ever, felt drawn out of it or aware of the presence of a writer at work while I was in it. And in this way, I think the novel was a success. And yes, I even cried, and I give it a one hanky review. Here's my hanky here. A three hanky review would be a real tearjerker, but this got a one hanky review, and I do cry kind of easily, but not that easily. I have to be somewhat invested in it for me to actually feel compelled to cry. So my one qualm comes with my favorite character in the book, poor Johnny Keir, whose drunken mother dropped him on his whatever and crippled him for life. He's a bit of a stock character. He's a poor child. He's a crippled child. He never complains. He's long-suffering. He's the cheerful martyr. And because of this, he sort of is like an American version of Dickens' Tiny Tim. And I have to be honest, I'm actually kind of okay with that. So he in fact was the reason for my one hanky moment in the novel. So Johnny Quinn is my favorite character, but he is a bit of a problem because he's a bit of a stock character. Now, I have seen speculation that his family won the Pulitzer not because of its own merits, but because of Poole's previous novel, which was wildly popular, called The Harbor. And that was published before the Pulitzers had ever been instituted. So people thought that maybe Poole won not because of the merits of his family, but because of the merits of The Harbor. So the question is raised, does his family deserve to win the Pulitzer Prize? Which the answer is, of course, no. No novel deserves anything. Prizes are fickle. They come and they go. Now, on the other hand, maybe, yes, it did deserve it because if it won it, it deserved it. If it didn't, it didn't. But it did, is it? So there you go. Prizes come and go, and didn't seem to do this novel much good in terms of keeping it alive for the next 100 years, but it at least made it somewhere so that it could alert me to read it in 2025. So I guess it did its job as far as that's concerned. So I guess this wraps up the first version of Pulitzer Who. You'll have to stay tuned for the next version where we'll both be surprised by whatever it is because I haven't quite sussed that out yet. But my review of the very first Pulitzer Prize winning novel is I quite enjoyed his family and I do recommend it. So I thank you for joining me here again at Glitterature Alley, and until we meet again, Ernest Poole and I would like to remind you that the world is full of wonder and that you should pay attention. Until we meet again, I am Tootight Lautrec. Mwah, mwah, mwah. Here's to you.